Hey guys, I got an awesome video here, something really special. It's a testimonial by Neville Goddard himself. It was while he was stationed in a large army camp in Louisiana. He was desirous in getting out of that and being honorably discharged and trying to get back home to New York for specific reasons. And he used his imagination in order to get out of the army and be honorably discharged. And I thought this is a really, really awesome story, and I wanted to share it with you guys. This is a story with every detail of which I am personally familiar. That's pretty much Neville Goddard saying that it's him. And I've also heard him talk about this story in other lectures. In the spring of 1943, a recently drafted soldier was stationed in a large army camp in Louisiana. He was intensely eager to get out of the army, but only in an entirely honorable way. The only way he could do this was to apply for a discharge. The application then required the approval of his commanding officer to become effective. Based on army regulations, the decision of the commanding officer was final and could not be appealed. The soldier, following all the necessary procedure, applied for a discharge. Within 4 hours, his application was returned marked disapproved. Convinced he could not appeal the decision to any higher authority, military or civilian, he turned within to his own consciousness, determined to rely on the law of assumption. The soldier realized that his consciousness was the only reality, and his particular state of consciousness determined the events he would encounter. That night, in the interval between getting into bed and falling asleep, he concentrated on consciously using the law of assumption. In imagination, he felt himself to be in his own apartment in New York City. He visualized his apartment, that is, in his mind's eye. He actually saw his own apartment, mentally picturing each one of the familiar rooms with all the furnishings vividly real. With this picture clearly visualized and lying flat on his back, he completely relaxed physically. In this way, he induced a state bordering on sleep, at the same time retaining control of the direction of his attention. When his body was completely immobilized, he assumed that he was in his own room and felt himself to be lying in his own bed, a different feeling from that of lying on an army cot. In imagination, he rose from the bed, walked from the room to room, touching various pieces of furniture. He then went to the window and, with his hands resting on the sill, looked out on the street on which his apartment faced. So vivid was all this in his imagination that he saw in detail the pavement, the railings, the trees, and the familiar red brick of the building on the opposite side of the street. He then returned to his bed and felt himself drifting off to sleep. He knew that it was most important in the successful use of this law that at the actual point of falling asleep, his consciousness be filled with the assumption. That's something really important, guys. Your consciousness must be filled with the assumption that he was already what he wanted to be. All that he did in imagination was based on the assumption that he was no longer in the army. Night after night, the soldier enacted this drama. Night after night, in imagination, he felt himself honorably discharged, back in his home, seeing all the familiar surroundings and falling asleep in his own bed. This continued for 8 nights. For 8 nights, his objective experience continued to be directly opposite to his subjective experience in the consciousness each night before going to sleep. On the 9th day, orders came through the battalion headquarters for the soldier to fill out a new application for his discharge. Shortly after this was done, he was ordered to report to the colonel's office. During the discussion, the colonel asked him if he was still desirous of getting out of the army. Upon receiving the affirmative reply, the colonel said he would personally disagreed, and while he had strong objections to approving of the discharge, he had decided to overlook these objections and to approve it. Within a few hours, the application was approved, and the soldier, now a civilian, was on a train bound for home. All right, guys, this is Neville Goddard's actual testimony, his testimonial, and I really wanted to share it with you. And I think that there's a few points here I wanted to point out, a few things I wanted to point out. That your consciousness must be filled with the assumption. Wow, I mean, I think we all know that, but this is just really gets into it, and he really explains that well, and he really goes into detail about how he created this whole new application, where the colonel called him into the office and said, even though he strongly disagreed with, and that he was going against direct orders and direct procedure, that he was still going to overlook all that and grant his discharge, which I thought was really amazing, guys. And I really wanted to share this with you. And it's out of The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. Neville Goddard's testimonial himself. All right, thank you, guys.